Kim Tae-ho sat in the cold metal chair and stared at the judges who would decide his fate. The courtroom was packed with reporters and angry aliens who wanted his head on a spike. He had been the best military engineer in the Earth Defense Corps. For 15 years, his designs had saved millions of human lives during the terrible war with the Zephon Empire, but none of that mattered now. 3 months ago, his automated defense system had made a terrible mistake. The system was supposed to protect Earth from enemy ships, but something went wrong. A diplomatic vessel carrying peace negotiators had been flying toward Earth. The ship was sending all the right signals and following the correct flight path, but the defense system saw it as a threat and fired anyway. The explosion was massive. The entire ship was destroyed in seconds. 3 alien ambassadors died instantly along with their crew. The peace talks that could have ended the war were ruined. The alien alliance was furious. They demanded justice, and they wanted Blood Tae-ho had built that defense system with his own hands. He had programmed every line of code and tested it 1,000 times. The system should never have fired on a peaceful ship, but the investigation found a tiny bug in the code, a single mistake that had deadly consequences. The mistake was so small that even the best programmers had missed it during testing, but that small mistake had killed innocent beings. The lead judge was a tall alien with blue skin and 4 arms. His voice was cold when he spoke. Kim Tae-ho, you are found guilty of negligent homicide and crimes against galactic peace. The court sentences you to life imprisonment on Ketos Prime. Colony Tae-ho felt his heart stop. Ketos Prime was known throughout the galaxy as the worst prison in existence. It was where they sent the most dangerous criminals to die slowly. The planet was a frozen wasteland where the air itself was poison. No one ever escaped from Ketos Prime, because escape meant death within hours. His lawyer tried to argue that it was an accident, that Tae-ho had served his people faithfully for years, but the alien judges did not care. They needed someone to blame for the failed peace talks, and Tae-ho was the obvious choice. The sentence was final, and there would be no appeal. 2 guards came to take him away. Tae-ho looked back at the courtroom one last time. He saw his wife crying in the back row. Her name was Kim So-ra, and they had been married for 10 years. She was the only good thing in his life now, but he would never see her again. The guards put heavy chains on his hands and feet and led him out of the courtroom. The transport to the prison ship took 3 hours. Tae-ho was locked in a small cell. With 5 other prisoners, they were all going to Ketos Prime, and they all looked terrified. One prisoner was a human named Park Jin-woo who had been caught selling weapons to rebels. He told Tae-ho horrible stories about the prison colony. The planet is frozen solid. Park said, his voice shaking. The temperature outside is -60 degrees. The air will burn your lungs if you breathe it. The guards do not care if you live or die. They just dump you there and leave you to survive or die. Another prisoner was an alien called Vexmore, who had killed 3 people in a bar fight. He was big and covered in scales, but even he looked scared when he talked about Ketos Prime. The current governor is Vor Khan, he said. He is cruel and stupid. He lets prisoners fight each other for food. Most people die in the first month. Tae-ho listened to their stories, but he did not feel afraid yet. He was an engineer, and engineers solved problems. Every problem had a solution, even problems that seemed impossible. He started thinking about what he knew about Ketos Prime from the technical reports he had read. The planet was rich in rare minerals that the galaxy needed for technology. It had massive geothermal vents that could provide unlimited power. The prison was built near these vents, but the reports said the power systems were always failing. The buildings were falling apart, and prisoners died regularly from cold or poison gas leaks. The more Tae-ho thought about it, the more he realized that the problems were not caused by the planet itself. They were caused by bad management and poor engineering. The prison could be fixed if someone knew how to do it properly. But the governors who ran these colonies were usually corrupt officials who did not care. About the prisoners. The journey to Ketos Prime took 2 weeks. The prison transport ship was old and dirty. The food was terrible, and the other prisoners fought constantly over the small portions Tejo kept to himself and spent his time thinking about engineering problems. He drew diagrams on scraps of paper showing how power systems could be improved and how buildings could be better insulated. Park Jin-woo noticed what he was doing and asked about the drawings. Tai-ho explained some basic engineering concepts and Park was amazed. "You really think you can fix that place?" Park asked. "Nobody has ever made Ketos Prime better. It just gets worse every year." Maybe, Tejo said quietly, but someone has to try when they finally arrived at Ketos. Prime Tejo got his first look at his new home through the small window of the transport ship. The planet was white and gray with no signs of life. The prison buildings looked like metal boxes scattered across the ice. Steam rose from cracks in the ground where the geothermal vents leaked heat into the frozen air. The landing was rough and the prisoners were herded off the ship in chains. The cold hit them immediately, even though they were wearing prison uniforms designed for harsh environments. The air was thin and had a bitter chemical taste that made Tejo cough. The guards wore full environmental suits because the air was too dangerous for most species to breathe. Without protection, Governor Vorkon was waiting for them at the landing pad. He was a large alien with gray skin and small, mean eyes. He looked at the new prisoners like they were pieces of meat. "Welcome to Ketos Prime," he said in a voice like grinding metal. "This is where you will die. Some of you will die fast. Some will die slow, but you will all die here." The prison buildings were worse than Tejo had imagined. The walls were cracked and leaked poisonous gas. The heating system barely worked, and many areas were so cold that prisoners had to huddle together to stay warm. The electrical system failed several times a day, plunging sections of the prison into darkness. The water was dirty and tasted like chemicals. But Tejo saw something else. He saw potential. The geothermal vents were incredibly powerful sources of energy that were being completely wasted. The mineral deposits could make the prison rich if they were mined properly. The buildings could be repaired and improved with the right materials and knowledge. That night, as he lay on a thin mattress, in a cell with 3 other prisoners, Tejo made a decision. He was going to survive, and he was going to fix this place. Even if it killed him, he was going to prove that Ketos Prime could be better. The other prisoners thought he was crazy, but Tejo had always been crazy. That was how he had become the best engineer in the Earth Defense Corps. Tejo had been at Ketos Prime for only 3 days when disaster struck. The main power plant exploded at dawn, sending a massive fireball into the gray sky. The sound was so loud that prisoners throughout the colony felt the ground shake under their feet. Within minutes, half the prison was plunged into deadly darkness. The heating systems failed immediately, and the temperature inside the buildings began dropping fast. Without heat, hundreds of prisoners would freeze to death before morning came. The poisonous atmosphere outside meant they could not leave the buildings to find warmth. The situation was hopeless, and everyone knew it. Governor Vorkon arrived at the power plant screaming at his guards and engineers. He blamed everyone, except himself, for the explosion. His chief engineer was an alien named Krixdal, who tried to explain what had happened. But Vorkon just shouted louder. The governor wanted someone to fix the problem immediately, but no one knew how. Tejo watched the chaos from the crowd of prisoners who had gathered to see the damage. The explosion had destroyed the main power converter and damaged the control systems. The backup generators were running, but they could only provide power to essential life support systems. The heating would stay off until someone rebuilt the entire power grid. While Vorkon and his staff argued and pointed fingers, Tejo quietly studied the wreckage. He walked around the damaged equipment and examined the twisted metal and burned circuits. He could see exactly what had gone wrong. Someone had tried to increase the power output without understanding the system limits. The old equipment could not handle the extra load, and it had exploded. A young Korean prisoner named Lee Min-ho was standing nearby looking scared and guilty. Min-ho had been working in the power plant when the explosion happened, and Tae-ho could tell he knew something important. Tae-ho approached him carefully and spoke in a quiet voice. "What really happened here?" Min-ho looked around nervously to make sure no one was listening. "They ordered us to boost power output by 30% yesterday," he whispered. "I told them the system was too old, but they said do it anyway. I tried to warn them, but no one would listen." Tae-ho nodded. He had suspected something like this. The prison administrators were always trying to cut costs and increase efficiency without understanding the technical limits. They pushed equipment beyond its design specifications until something broke badly. "Can you show me the control room?" Tae-ho asked. Min-ho led him through the damaged building to a room filled with monitoring equipment and control panels. Most of the displays were dark, but Tae-ho could see enough to understand how the system worked. It was actually a clever design, but it was being operated by people who did not understand it. Tae-ho spent an hour studying the control panels and power distribution charts. He made notes on pieces of paper and drew simple diagrams. Min-ho watched him work and began to understand that this new prisoner actually knew what he was doing. "You are an engineer," Min-ho said with surprise. "I was," Tae-ho replied. "Now I need to find some other people who want to live through the night." Tae-ho started looking for prisoners with technical skills. He found Park So-young, a former pilot who understood electrical systems. She was trying to stay warm in the main dormitory with dozens of other prisoners. Tae-ho explained his plan to create temporary heating units using parts from damaged equipment. So-young was skeptical at first. "You think you can fix this mess?" she asked. "The guards have been trying for hours, and they have given up." "I do not need to fix everything," Tae-ho said. "I just need to keep people alive until morning." Next, he found Cho Hyun-woo, who had worked as a maintenance engineer before his arrest. Hyun-woo knew where to find spare parts and tools in the prison workshops. Tae-ho showed him how to build simple heating elements using metal coils and electrical components. The three of them worked together to create a plan. They would reroute power from non-essential systems like lighting and communications to run emergency heaters. In the dormitories, it would not restore full power, but it would provide enough heat to keep people from freezing. Word spread quickly among the prisoners that the new arrival was trying to save them. Other prisoners volunteered to help even though they did not understand the technical work. They carried parts and tools where they were needed and helped install the temporary heating units. A prisoner named Kim Jae-min, who had been a teacher, helped organize the work crews. He made sure that people worked in shifts so everyone could rest and stay warm. An alien prisoner called Bextor, who was very strong, helped move heavy equipment that the humans could not lift alone. The work was dangerous because they had to access electrical systems. While power was still flowing, Tae-ho showed the volunteers how to work safely and avoid electrocution. He taught them to test circuits before touching them and to always work in pairs for safety. As the night went on, more prisoners joined the effort. Even some who had been hostile to each other began working together. The common threat of freezing to death made old conflicts seem unimportant. Everyone wanted to survive until morning. Governor Vorkan noticed the activity and came to investigate. He was angry that prisoners were working on the power systems without permission, but when he saw that they were actually making progress, he decided not to stop them. He did not want to explain to his superiors why hundreds of prisoners had frozen to death. By midnight, the temporary heating system was working. The dormitories were still cold, but they were warm enough to keep people alive. The prisoners huddled together under blankets and shared body heat, but no one was in danger of freezing anymore. Tae-ho continued working through the night to improve the system. He showed Min-ho how to monitor the power flow and make adjustments when needed. He taught So-young how to repair damaged circuits and Hyun-woo how to maintain the heating elements. When morning came, something amazing had happened. Not a single prisoner had died from the cold. For the first time in years, the prisoners had survived a major crisis without losing anyone. The temporary heating system was still running and providing warmth throughout the colony. The other prisoners looked at Tae-ho with new respect and hope. They had watched him turn a hopeless situation into a manageable problem, using nothing but technical knowledge and organized teamwork. He had not just saved their lives, he had shown them that problems could be solved if people worked together. Min-ho approached Tai-ho as the sun rose over the frozen landscape. "You did it," he said with amazement. "You actually saved us all. This is just the beginning," Tai-ho replied. "There is much more work to do if we want to make this place livable." Other prisoners began coming to him with different problems. The water purification system was failing and people were getting sick. The structural damage in the living quarters was getting worse, and some areas were becoming dangerous to inhabit. The waste disposal system was backing up and creating health hazards. Each time Tai-ho listened carefully to the problem and thought of solutions, he taught people how to fix things themselves instead of just doing the work for them. He wanted to create a community of people who could solve problems together rather than depending on one person. By the end of his first week at Kido's Prime, Tai-ho had become the unofficial leader of the prisoner population. They came to him for advice and help with technical problems, but more importantly, they had begun to hope that their situation could improve. Word of Tae-ho's success with the power crisis spread throughout Kido's Prime like wildfire. Prisoners who had given up hope began to believe that maybe their situation could improve. The guards noticed that fights between prisoners had decreased, and people were working together on repair projects instead of just trying to survive each day. On his 10th day at the prison, Tai-ho received an unexpected visitor. Yang Da-yoon was a middle-aged Korean woman who had been imprisoned for stealing money from the government agency where she worked as an administrator. She had been at Kido's Prime for 2 years and knew more about how the prison operated than most of the guards. Da-yoon found Tai-ho in the workshop area where he was teaching a group of prisoners how to repair damaged heating units. She waited until the lesson was finished before approaching him. "I need to talk to you privately," she said, her voice serious. They walked to a quiet corner of the building where no one could overhear their conversation. Da-yoon looked around nervously before speaking. "You have been making changes here and people are talking," she began. "Governor Vorkon is getting worried that you are becoming too popular with the prisoners." Tae-ho nodded. "I expected that." "What do you want to tell me?" Da-yoon pulled out some papers that she had hidden in her clothes. "These are budget reports and resource allocation documents that I copied from the administrative offices." She said, "You need to see what is really happening here." The papers showed something shocking. Kido's Prime received massive funding from the Galactic Prison Authority. The colony was supposed to be completely self-sufficient and even profitable with the money they were given. The budget included funds for proper heating, food, medical supplies, and equipment maintenance, but the reality was completely different. Most of the money was being stolen by Governor Vorkon and his staff. They reported false expenses and kept the extra funds for themselves. The prisoners were living in terrible conditions, not because the colony was poor, but because the administrators were criminals. "This place should be comfortable," Tae-ho said, studying the numbers. "We should have good food, proper heating, and modern equipment." "Exactly," Da-yoon replied. "Instead, we get scraps while Vorkon gets rich. The death rate here is so high that the prison authority sends extra money for body disposal. Vorkon keeps that money too." Tae-ho realized they needed to think much bigger than emergency repairs. They needed to completely rebuild the colony from the ground up, using the resources that were already supposed to be available. The prisoners could do the work themselves if they were properly organized and equipped. Over the next few days, Tai-ho began recruiting people with different skills for a massive improvement project. He found young Woo-jin, who had been a farmer before his arrest. Woo-jin understood agriculture and food production, which could solve the colony's nutrition problems. The geothermal vents provide unlimited heat. Tae-ho explained to Woo-jin. "We can build greenhouses and grow fresh food. year-round. Wu Jin was excited by the idea. He had watched prisoners get sick from eating the terrible processed food that was shipped to the colony. Fresh vegetables and fruits would improve everyone's health and morale. Next, Tai Ho recruited Kang Subin, who had been a teacher before being imprisoned for political crimes. Subin could organize educational programs to teach prisoners useful skills that would help them find jobs when they were released. Many of these people have never learned practical skills, Subin said. They were criminals because they had no other options. If we teach them to build things and solve problems, they can have better lives. Kim Jae-hyun had worked in logistics and supply management before his arrest. He understood how to organize complex projects and manage resources efficiently. Tai-ho put him in charge of planning the construction work and distributing materials. The transformation began immediately. Wu Jin started building the first greenhouse using scavenged materials and geothermal heating. The structure was simple but effective, and within days, they had planted the first vegetables. Subin organized classes where prisoners could learn basic engineering, electrical work, and construction skills. Jae-hyun created work schedules so that everyone contributed to the improvement projects while still maintaining the essential systems that kept the colony running. He also started tracking resources and materials so they could plan bigger projects. The results were amazing within 2 weeks. The colony's death rate dropped to 0. For the first time in its history, prisoners who had been fighting each other constantly began working together on construction projects. The food improved dramatically when the first vegetables were harvested from the greenhouse. More importantly, the prisoners began to take pride in their work. They were not just surviving anymore, they were building something better. The harsh environment that had seemed like a curse became an advantage. The unlimited geothermal power let them run equipment and heating systems that would have been impossible anywhere else. The mining operations that Jae-hyun organized began producing valuable minerals that could be sold to generate revenue for more improvements. The prisoners worked harder than any paid employees because they knew the benefits would go directly to improving their own lives. But Governor Vorkhan was becoming more and more angry every day. His authority was being undermined and his theft was becoming obvious as the colony prospered. He could not explain to his superiors why the colony needed emergency funding when the prisoners were clearly making it successful. Vorkhan began plotting to eliminate Tai-ho and restore his control through violence. He gathered his most loyal guards and planned to destroy the new facilities and arrest the leaders of the improvement projects. He wanted to force the prisoners back into desperation and dependence. However, Vorkhan made a serious mistake. He underestimated how much the prison population had changed. They were no longer desperate individuals fighting for scraps. They had become an organized community with strong leadership and common purpose. The prisoners had also noticed that some of the guards were unhappy with Vorkhan's leadership. The guards worked in the same terrible conditions as everyone else, and they had seen how much better life could be when things were properly managed. Captain Ryu Dong-min was the senior human guard at the colony. He had been watching the changes, with interest and growing respect for what the prisoners had accomplished. He began to question whether following Vorkhan's orders was really in anyone's best interest. Other guards were having similar thoughts. They had families back home, and they wanted to serve their time at Kato's prime and return safely. A colony that was well-run and peaceful was much safer for everyone than one where people were desperate and violent. When Vorkhan announced his plan to destroy the greenhouse and arrest Tai-ho, several guards quietly warned the prisoners about what was coming. The information gave Tai-ho time to prepare for the confrontation that was inevitable. Da-un continued to provide inside information about Vorkhan's activities. She had been copying more documents that showed the extent of his corruption and the legal violations he had committed. The evidence would be useful if they could find a way to present it to higher authorities. Subin had been researching prison law using the colony's computer system. She discovered that prisoners had certain rights under galactic law, including the right to safe living conditions and adequate food. If these rights were not provided, the prisoners could petition for changes in administration. Stage was set for a confrontation that would determine the future of Kitos Prime Colony. Teho had built something amazing in just 2 weeks, but now he would have to fight to protect it. The confrontation came on a cold morning during Teho's 3rd week at Kitos Prime. Governor Vorkon arrived at the greenhouse complex with 12 armed guards. He was furious and ready for violence. His plan was simple: destroy the improvements. That made him look bad and arrest anyone who resisted. The greenhouse had become a symbol of hope for the prisoners. Fresh vegetables were growing under the transparent domes, heated by geothermal energy. Prisoners worked together, tending the plants and learning agricultural skills. The sight of green growing things in the frozen wasteland gave everyone hope for the future. Vorkon stood outside the main greenhouse and shouted orders to his guards. "Destroy these illegal structures," he commanded. "These prisoners have no authority to build anything here. Everything they have done violates prison regulations." But when the guards stepped forward to carry out the orders, they found themselves facing something unexpected. Instead of a mob of angry prisoners, they saw an organized group led by Tai Ho, who stepped calmly forward to speak. "Governor Vorkon," he said in a respectful but firm voice, "these facilities are not illegal under galactic prison regulations. We have the right to improve our living conditions, as long as we do not compromise security." Lee Soo-jin stepped forward beside Tae-ho. She was a former lawyer who had been imprisoned for defending political dissidents. She had spent weeks researching prison law using the colony's computer system and had found important information. Under Article 15 of the Galactic Prison Code, she said in a clear voice, "Prisoners must be provided with adequate nutrition, medical care, and safe housing. If the administration fails to provide these necessities, prisoners have the right to provide them for themselves." Vorkon laughed mockingly. "You think you can quote law at me?" he snarled. "I am the governor here, and what I say is law." But Captain Ryu Dong-min stepped forward from among the guards. He had been thinking about this moment for days and had made his decision. "Sir," he said quietly, "I cannot follow orders that would endanger the safety of everyone in this colony." The other guards looked at each other uncertainly. They had been watching the colony transform over the past weeks. They had seen how much safer and more peaceful it had become when people had hope and purpose. Several more guards lowered their weapons. Vorkon realized he was losing control of the situations. His own security force was questioning his authority in front of the prisoners. This was exactly what he had feared would happen. "You are all traitors," he screamed. "I will report every one of you to the prison authority. You will all be court-martialed and imprisoned yourselves. Then I will report your theft of colony funds," Soo-jin said calmly, holding up the documents that Da-eun had provided. "We have evidence of massive financial crimes, including falsified reports and stolen supplies." The documents showed that Vorkon had been stealing more than 60% of the colony's budget over the past 3 years. The money that should have been used for food, heating, and medical supplies had been transferred to his personal accounts. Vorkon's face turned red with rage. "These are fake documents," he shouted. "You cannot prove anything. The proof is all around us," Tae-ho said, gesturing to the improved facilities. "This colony receives enough funding to be completely self-sufficient. The only reason prisoners were dying was because you were stealing the money meant to keep them alive." More guards began to step away from Vorkon as they understood the full extent of his corruption. They had believed that the colony was poor and that harsh conditions were unavoidable. Now they realized they had been helping a criminal steal from people who were already being punished. Vorkon realized he was trapped. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his own guards were turning against him, but instead of surrendering. He made a desperate decision that put everyone's life in danger. "If I cannot have control of this place, then no one can," he snarled. He ran toward the main power control station with 2 loyal guards following behind him. Tae-ho realized immediately what Vorkon was planning. The main power controls could shut down all systems in the colony, including life support. If Vorkon turned off the power in winter, everyone would be dead within hours. "Stop him," Tae-ho shouted, running after the governor. The chase led through the winding corridors of the power plant building. Vorkon reached the main control room first and began frantically pressing buttons and switches. Alarms began sounding as critical systems started shutting down. Tae-ho burst into the control room just as the heating systems went offline. Emergency lights flickered on as the main power grid began to fail. Throughout the colony, prisoners and guards felt the temperature starting to drop. "You cannot stop me," Vorkon yelled. He was pulling fuses and breaking control switches to make the damage permanent. The power system that Tae-ho had spent weeks improving was being destroyed, but Tae-ho had prepared for this possibility. He had taught his team how to operate backup systems and bypass damaged controls. Min-ho and So-young were already at the secondary control station rerouting power around the damaged circuits. "We can maintain life support from the backup station," Tae-ho called out to the people gathering outside the control room. "But someone needs to stop Vorkon before he destroys everything." Captain Dong-min and 3 other guards entered the control room and surrounded Vorkon. "Governor, you are under arrest for endangering the lives of everyone in this colony," he announced. Vorkon fought desperately, but he was outnumbered. The guards restrained him and prevented him from causing more damage to the power systems. But the main controls were badly damaged and would take time to repair throughout. The colony people worked together to deal with the crisis. The prisoners and guards who had been enemies just hours before now cooperated to maintain essential systems. Everyone understood that their survival depended on working together. Subin used the communication system to contact the Galactic Prison Authority and report what had happened. She transmitted the evidence of Vorkon's crimes and requested immediate assistance. The prison authority was shocked to learn about the situation at Ketos Prime. In the emergency control room, Tae-ho and his team worked to restore full power to the colony. The backup systems were holding, but they needed to repair the main grid before the backups failed. It was dangerous work that required precise coordination. Dae-yoon coordinated the distribution of emergency supplies and made sure that vulnerable prisoners stayed warm during the power crisis. Woo-jin organized teams to protect the greenhouse from freezing temperatures using portable heaters. The day progressed. It became clear that something historic was happening at Ketos Prime. For the first time in the colony's history, the prisoners were not just surviving a crisis, they were managing it. The difference between competent leadership and corrupt administration was obvious to everyone. By evening, the power systems were restored and the colony was safe. But everyone knew that things had changed forever. Vorkon's authority was broken, and the prisoners had proven they could run the colony better than the official administration. The question now was, what would happen next? The Galactic Prison Authority would have to decide whether to send a new governor or acknowledge what everyone could see that Tae-ho and his team were. The real leaders of Ketos Prime Colony that night, as people gathered in the warm dining halls to share meals from the greenhouse, many prisoners began talking about the future. For the first time, they believed that change was possible and that their voices might actually matter. What happened next surprised everyone, including Tae-ho himself. The prisoners did not just want him to solve their immediate problems, they wanted him to officially take charge of the entire colony. The idea started with whispered conversations in the dining halls and workshops, but it quickly grew into something much bigger. Hong Ye-jin was an elderly Korean woman who had been imprisoned for participating in anti-government protests. She had been at Kitos Prime for 4 years and had survived by staying quiet and avoiding trouble. But watching Tae-ho transform the colony had awakened something in her that had been sleeping for years. Ye-jin began talking to other long-term prisoners about organizing an election. She believed that if they could choose their own leader legally, then no one could challenge their right to govern themselves. It was a radical idea that had never been tried in any prison colony. "The guards are on our side now," she explained to a group of prisoners. "Most of them support Tae-ho because he has made this place safer for everyone. If we can prove that we have the legal right to choose our leadership, then the prison authority will have to accept it." The idea spread rapidly through the colony. Prisoners who had never cared about politics before began discussing the possibility of self-governance. They had seen what competent leadership could accomplish in just 3 weeks, and they wanted more of the same. But there were challenges. Many prisoners were from different species and cultures. Some had been enemies before coming to Kitos Prime. Others worried that the prison authority would send military forces to crush any rebellion before it started. Tae-ho was hesitant about the idea. At first, he had focused on solving practical problems, not on politics. But as more people approached him about leadership, he began to understand that this was bigger than just fixing broken equipment. "We are not just talking about running a prison colony," he told his core team during a late-night meeting. "We are talking about proving that people can govern themselves better than corrupt officials." Kan Soo-jin had been researching the legal aspects of prisoner self-governance. She found an obscure regulation that allowed prison communities to petition for administrative changes when the official leadership was demonstrably incompetent or corrupt. Article 27 of the Prison Administration Code, she explained. The regulation was written decades ago, but it has never been used. "The key requirement is that we must prove both administrative failure and our own competence to do better." Da-yoon worked with Soo-jin to compile a complete record of Vorkon's crimes and failures. The evidence was overwhelming. Under his leadership, the colony had one of the highest death rates in the galactic prison system, despite receiving adequate funding. The theft of supplies and money was documented in detail. At the same time, they documented the improvements that had been made under Tae-ho's informal leadership. Death rates had dropped to 0. Food quality had improved dramatically. The power systems were more reliable than they had been in years. The colony was becoming profitable through organized mining operations. The decision to hold an election was made at a colony-wide meeting in the main dining hall. More than 800 prisoners attended, including representatives from 12 different species. The meeting was chaotic at first, with many people talking at once. Tae-ho stood up to address the crowd, and the room gradually became quiet. He spoke simply and honestly about what they were proposing. "We are not rebelling against the prison system," he said. "We are asking to govern ourselves within the existing legal framework. If we can prove that we can run this colony better than the corrupt officials who were stealing from us, then we have the right to do so." An alien prisoner named Vex Tar, who had been hostile to humans, raised his hand. "I do not trust any human to lead me," he said. "Why should we follow you instead of choosing one of our own leaders?" "Because it does not matter what species I am," Tae-ho replied. "What matters is whether I can solve problems and make life better for everyone here." The results speak for themselves. You have seen what we can accomplish when we work together. Other prisoners began standing up to speak in support of Tae-ho. A Zephon named Kelwin talked about how the improved heating had saved his life. A human woman named Park Mi-young described how the education programs were giving her skills she could use after release. Even some former enemies spoke in favor of the proposal. Bex Tor, the strong alien who had helped with construction, Work said that Taeho treated all species with equal respect, unlike the previous administration that had favored certain groups. The vote was organized over 3 days to make sure everyone could participate. Prisoners cast ballots secretly to avoid intimidation. The choices were simple support: Taeho's petition for self-governance or request a new governor from the prison authority. When the ballots were counted, the result was overwhelming. 912 prisoners supported the petition. Only 37 voted against it. Even more importantly, prisoners from all species voted together, showing that the colony had become a unified community. But winning the vote was only the first step. The petition had to be submitted to the Galactic Prison Authority, and they had to accept it. The case would attract attention from across the galaxy, because nothing like this had ever been attempted before. The legal arguments were complex. Sujin worked for days preparing the formal petition. She had to prove that Vorkon had violated multiple laws and regulations. She also had to demonstrate that the prisoner community was capable of responsible self-governance. The evidence of improvement under Taeho's leadership was impressive. The colony had gone from crisis to prosperity in less than a month. The death rate had dropped to 0. The budget was balanced for the first time in years. The mining operations were generating significant revenue. When the petition was submitted, it caused a sensation throughout the galactic prison system. News reporters began investigating the story. Prison administrators on other colonies worried about whether their own prisoners might demand similar changes. The prison authority was caught. In an embarrassing situation, they could not deny that Kitos Prime had dramatically improved under prisoner leadership, but accepting the petition would set a precedent that could change prison systems throughout the galaxy. For a week, the colony waited for a response. Taeho continued organizing improvements and solving problems, but everyone was nervous about what would happen if the petition was rejected. Would they send military forces to restore official control? Would there be punishment for the prisoners who had supported the rebellion? During the waiting period, something unexpected happened. Applications began arriving from prisoners on other colonies who wanted to transfer to Kitos Prime. Word had spread that it was becoming a model facility where prisoners could learn skills and improve their lives instead of just serving time. The applications created another problem for the prison authority. If they rejected the petition, they would have to explain why prisoners preferred to be governed by other prisoners rather than official administrators. Captain Dong Min and the other guards who had supported the change also submitted reports praising the new leadership. They described how much safer and more efficient the colony had become under prisoner management. On the 7th day, the response finally came. The Galactic Prison Authority announced that they were sending an inspection team to evaluate the situation at Kitos Prime. The inspection would determine whether the petition would be approved or rejected. Everyone in the colony understood that this inspection would be the most important week in their lives. They had one chance to prove that prisoners could govern themselves responsibly. If they failed, they would face severe punishment. If they succeeded, they would make history. The inspection team arrived at Kitos Prime on a transport ship much larger than the one that had brought Taeho to the colony. 5 officials from the Galactic Prison Authority stepped onto the landing pad wearing expensive uniforms and serious expressions. They had come to decide the fate of nearly 1,000 prisoners. Director Corvan was the lead inspector. He was a tall alien with silver skin who had managed prison systems for 30 years. He had never seen anything like the petition from Kitos Prime, and he was skeptical that prisoners could govern themselves responsibly. The first thing the inspectors noticed was how clean and organized everything looked. The landing pad was clear of debris. The buildings were well maintained, and there were no signs of the chaos they expected to find in a prison colony run by criminals. Taeho met them at the entrance, wearing a simple prisoner uniform, but carrying himself with the confidence of a leader. He was accompanied by his core team, including Da-Yoon Soo-jin and Captain Dong Min, who represented the guard staff. "Welcome to Kitos Prime Colony." Taiho said respectfully, "We are honored that you have come to evaluate our petition. We are prepared to show you everything we have, accomplished, and answer any questions you may have." Director Corvan looked around suspiciously. "Where is the previous governor?" he asked. "We were told that Governor Vorkhan was removed from his position. He is in protective custody awaiting trial for corruption and endangering prisoner lives," Captain Dongmin explained. "We have documented evidence of massive theft and criminal negligence." The inspection lasted 3 days. The officials examined every aspect of colony operations from the power systems to the food production facilities. They interviewed prisoners, guards, and administrative staff. They reviewed financial records and safety reports. What they found was remarkable. The colony was not just functioning well, it was thriving. The death rate was 0, the lowest in the entire prison system. The budget showed a profit for the first time in the colony's history. The mining operations were more productive than ever before. More importantly, the prisoners were learning valuable skills through the education programs. Many had requested to extend their sentences so they could complete training programs. The recidivism rate among prisoners released from Quito's Prime had dropped to almost nothing. Inspector Melvox was amazed by what she saw in the greenhouse facilities. Fresh vegetables were growing in multiple climate-controlled domes, providing nutritious food year-round. The agricultural program was teaching prisoners skills they could use to find legitimate work after release. "I have never seen anything like this," she told Director Corvan. "These prisoners have created a model facility that other colonies should study and copy." The workshops were equally impressive. Prisoners were learning engineering, electrical, work construction, and manufacturing skills. The quality of their work was professional level, and they took obvious pride in what they were building. But the most important discovery was how the different species were working together. Humans, aliens, who had been traditional enemies, and criminals from hostile cultures were cooperating peacefully on complex projects. The social harmony was unprecedented in prison system history. On the second day of inspection, Director Corvan had a private meeting with Taiho. He wanted to understand how a disgraced engineer had accomplished something that experienced prison administrators had failed to achieve. "You were sentenced here for a serious crime," he said. "How do we know you will not make another mistake that costs lives?" "That mistake taught me the most important lesson of my life," Taiho replied. "I learned that good intentions are not enough. You need competent execution and constant attention to safety. Every system we build here has multiple safeguards and backup plans." The director studied the technical drawings and safety protocols that Taiho had developed. They were more thorough than the standards used in most official prison facilities. The attention to detail was extraordinary. "Why should we trust prisoners to govern themselves?" he asked. "This has never been done before. What if it fails? It has already succeeded." Taiho replied, "The question is whether you will recognize that success or try to return to the failures of the past. The prisoners here are not just serving time anymore. They are building better lives for themselves and proving that people can change." On the third day, the inspectors held interviews with randomly selected prisoners. They wanted to hear honest opinions about the changes and whether people felt coerced into supporting the new leadership. The responses were overwhelmingly positive. Prisoner after prisoner described how their lives had improved under Taiho's leadership. They talked about learning new skills, having hope for the future, and feeling respected as human beings for the first time in years. Even former opponents of the changes admitted they had been wrong. Park Cheol-soo, who had initially resisted the improvements, said that he now supported them completely because the results were undeniable. An alien prisoner named Zekphone, who had been serving a life sentence, said something that surprised the inspectors. "I came here to die slowly," he explained, "but now I want to live and contribute something valuable to society." The inspectors also interviewed the guards who had supported the change. Captain Dong Min explained how much safer the colony had become when prisoners were treated with respect and given meaningful work. To-do violence between prisoners has almost disappeared. He reported morale among the guard staff is the highest it has been in years. We have fewer disciplinary problems and more cooperation than ever before. On the final evening, Director Corvan called a meeting with his team to discuss their recommendation. The evidence was clear that the colony was functioning better than any other prison facility in the system, but approving the petition would set a precedent that could change everything if we approve. Other prisons will demand similar changes. Inspector Melvox pointed out. Are we prepared for prisoners throughout the galaxy to petition for self-governance? Maybe that would not be a bad thing. Director Corvan replied, we have seen the results here. What if we have been doing prison administration wrong for decades? The decision was announced the next morning in front of the entire colony population. Director Corvan stood on a platform in the main courtyard with hundreds of prisoners and guards watching nervously. After careful evaluation, he began. The Galactic Prison Authority has decided to approve the petition from Quito's Prime Colony. Kim Tae-ho will be appointed as the official governor of this facility. The cheering could be heard across the frozen landscape. Prisoners who had been enemies hugged each other. Guards threw their helmets in the air. Da-eun and Su-jin cried tears of joy that they had helped make history. But Director Corvan continued with important conditions. This appointment is probationary for 1 year. During that time, colony performance will be closely monitored. Any decline in safety or efficiency will result in immediate return to traditional administration. Tae-ho accepted the